All right, so welcome everyone to session 1 of our 2023 masterclass. This session is focused on the refreshed national standards for volunteer involvement. My name is Mel and I'm the Community Connection Programs Manager for Volunteering Tasmania. So thank you all for joining us. It's great to see so many people online and interested in this topic. So this is session 1 of 3 through the day, and we hope that you'll join us for more sessions through the day. Please note that this session is being recorded. So if you're not wanting to show your lovely faces on the screen, you are welcome to turn your camera off. Okay, so I would like to begin by acknowledging the Palawa people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting on today throughout La Traviata, Tasmania. Rhonda, could you move to slide 2, please? We've got a hand up. Sorry, Glenda. Are you meaning to put your hand up? Okay, I'll continue. I pay my respect to the elders past and present and recognise their continuing connection to lands, seas, skies and waterways of La Traviata. I express my gratitude that we share this land today, my sorrow for some of the costs of that sharing, and my hope and belief that we can move to a place of equity, justice and partnership together. We'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us today. I'm based in the northwest of the state and am on the land of the Punalapana people. Please feel free to pop in the chat your name, organisation and the lands you are joining from. Okay, so an overview for today's session includes the background and process for refreshing the national standards, an overview of the changes that have been made to the national standards. We have a panel of wonderful volunteer involving organisations who I'll introduce you to shortly. And then we'll have a short feedback survey and close. So quite a bit to cover in an hour and to get through. So if you do have any questions or comments, please pop them in the chat and our team will do their best to respond. If questions are not responded to during this session, we'll provide a Q&A snapshot for attendees following the session. So the national standards for volunteer involvement, as many of you know, is a best practice framework to guide volunteer involvement. They support safe, effective and inclusive volunteering. So why were the national standards refreshed? Next slide, please, Rhonda. So they were refreshed to ensure they reflected the contemporary environment and have a particular focus on support in inclusion and diversity. And through that process have been informed by a sector-wide consultation in 2023 and also through the National Strategy for Volunteering consultations in 2022. So a lot of information has been gathered as part of that refresh project from around the country within the volunteering sector. Next, great. So the refresh national standards reflect the evolving volunteering environment while retaining the foundational elements of the national standards for volunteer involvement, which were previously developed in 2015. The national standards highlight 8 key areas for effective volunteer engagement. Refresh national standards have been designed to allow more flexibility in implementation, recognising that volunteering takes place in highly diverse settings and modes. And for example, the growth in the virtual and micro volunteering spaces. They also have a focus on demonstrating best practice in structured organisations and programs, or as a guide to more organic or informed community-based groups aspiring to best practice without creating barriers or curtailing flexibility and creativity. So you'll see through the updated changes, groups are included as well as organisations. And as I said, they also support diversity and inclusion in all types of organisations and groups. The Refresh project was funded through the Volunteer Management Activity and has been a collaborative effort between Volunteering Australia and the volunteering peak bodies across Australia. Please note the Refresh standards have not yet officially been launched. You're getting a bit of a treat today. Volunteering Australia will do the official launch in early December. Today's session is really about preparing the Tasmanian volunteering sector by providing you with a snapshot of the changes prior to that launch. The content that we are sharing today has been confirmed and to our best knowledge will not be changed. Okay, so let's get into looking at the changes for each standard. So if we go to slide 7, thanks Rhonda, great. Hopefully everyone can see that okay, lots of information to cover. So standard 1 has changed from leadership and management to volunteering is embedded in leadership, governance and culture. So quite a change there to the title. We've highlighted the changes here, so you can see on the left-hand side the previous standard from 2015 and then what that change has been on the right-hand side. The main things to note here include the focus on engaging volunteers, volunteer participation, and that collaboration with volunteers really comes through within this standard. Have a look at standard 2. So standard 2 has changed from commitment to volunteer involvement to volunteer participation is championed and modelled. So a descriptor has been added here, so that's to strengthen this standard. The commitment to volunteer participation is set out through vision, planning and resourcing and supports the organisation or group's strategic direction. So this one has that focus around organisations and groups and their commitment to volunteer participation. Again, focusing on participation and engagement of the volunteer. There has been 2 additional criteria added to this standard. 2.2, a volunteering culture is championed and modelled at all levels of the organisation. And 2.4, an effective volunteer program has adequately supported and resourced volunteer management by a responsible person. So there's the main changes across standard 2. So standard 3 has changed from volunteer roles to volunteer roles are meaningful and tailored. So providing a bit more in-depth information there. So really bringing in that focus on volunteers' interests, their preferred style of participation, and again, collaboration with volunteers to design, negotiate and review roles. Standard 4 has changed from recruitment and selection to recruitment is equitable and diversity is valued. So quite an important change here for this one, which has a focus on diversity, inclusion and accessibility. There is an additional criteria here, 4.4. Diversity, inclusivity and accessibility principles are built into recruitment activity, reflecting and promoting awareness of and respect for diversity and inclusion and the inherent value this brings to the organisation. So a really important change that we're very happy to see. Standard 5 has changed from support and development to volunteers are supported and developed. So just a slight nuance there, I guess, in the title for this standard. Again, you'll see through the highlighted sections that volunteer participation and engagement are a focus. We're also using more contemporary terms. And the most significant change here has been around criteria 5.4. So people with responsibility for volunteers have sufficient time and resources to engage with and provide appropriate and required support to volunteers. So again, I'm sure you will agree, a really important change there. Standard 6 has changed from workplace safety and wellbeing to volunteer safety and wellbeing is protected. So we've got a descriptor which has been added for this one as well. The health, safety and wellbeing of volunteers are protected in the workplace and volunteers understand their rights and responsibilities. So really key information there to help support this standard. And the main change here has been to criteria 7.2. Sorry, wrong one. I'm looking at the next one. The main change, there's been an addition of 2 new criteria, 6.2. So we have organisations and groups understand their legal and ethical obligations to protect volunteers from harm. And then 6.5, complaints, concerns and safety incidents are analysed to identify causes and inform continuous improvement. And there has been that wellbeing focus which has been strengthened through this standard, then referencing the relevant insurances, which has been an addition, which is great to see. Standard 7 has changed from volunteer recognition to volunteers are recognised. So again, just a slight nuance there. A descriptor has been added which helps to enhance the standard. So volunteer contribution, value and impact are understood, appreciated and acknowledged. And the main change has been to criteria 7.2. Volunteer effort is measured and acknowledged in the organisation's reporting and used to demonstrate impact, both broadly and to the volunteer. So they are the main changes to each standard. Obviously, you will learn much more about the refresh standards after they are launched, and we will be offering training and workshops to the sector in 2024 to go into that in more detail. I would now like to introduce our wonderful panel. So if you can go to the next slide. Thanks, Rhonda. Hopefully we have all of these lovely volunteer involving organisation representatives here with us today. I know that Lois is on. So we've got Lois Berry from Hospice in Burnie. Kate, we've got Kate here. Kate from
yes,
MRC.
I'm here. Yep.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kate. MRC Tasmania, and Jenna from Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service. So I might stop sharing and we'll focus on our panel members. So do we have Jenna?
Hi, how you going?
Lovely. Hi, Jenna. Thanks so much for joining us. So thanks very much, Lois, Kate and Jenna, for agreeing to be on our panel. As you know, we've got some questions and I have shared those changes to the national standards, which I've just been through with you prior to this session so that you can prepare. So really interested to hear from each of you, and we might start with Lois. What stands out to you and your organisation regarding these changes?
Well, I think I focused on the language, that it's more inclusive language. It's using, words like culture, participation, diversity, tailored, and it's more sophisticated, I think, with words such as championed and embedded. And well, obviously they're so much more volunteer focused and so much more in depth. So I think they're going to be really much more meaningful to us and to work towards. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Your sound isn't overly clear, so I'm not sure if it's still coming through your headset potentially. No.
Would that be better?
That's better. That's much better. Thank you. That's great. We still did hear you. It was just a little bit.
So talking of language, you couldn't hear me that well.
Oh, we just had to lean in and really listen. So, Kate, really interested to hear from your perspective what stands out to you and your organisation regarding these changes.
Well, Lois stole my thunder because
lucky I went first, Kate.
that was that's what I've written down. Like, my first impression when I went through it was the language. I just found it a much more, I even used the word inclusive in my notes. I found it a much more inclusive set of standards. Everything was a lot clearer than the previous standards. And to be honest, it doesn't read like such a dramatic and scary document as the previous set of standards. And I've got on my notes here, I don't know if you're familiar with the 2015 version. And I know whenever we attend any of the network sessions or whatever, and we're doing that, like we're going through the standards. And I think a lot of us, we kind of freak out at standard 8. It's like one of the most scariest ones. And like, to be honest, with the wording of it now, I know that the criteria within the standard are exactly the same, but the heading itself is less, yeah, it's not intimidating. That's probably the best way of doing it. And I've also made a comment here that, most of us are not specifically trained in volunteer management. It's something that we've picked up accidentally or on purpose. We might be doing it in tandem with something else. So you kind of want to consider that the language that might be used in something needs to be accessible to everyone to be able to understand and pick up, especially if you then need to address the standards or go to other people in your organisation to talk about the standards and how the standards will work for them. So I think it's just much more straightforward, and I feel it defines the expectations a lot better. And I'm really And I think it works really well with the national strategy as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Kate. There was certainly a big focus on language and making the standards more accessible for all types of organisations and groups. So we're quite focused on resourced organisations previously. Jenna, how about you? What stands out to you in your organisation regarding the changes?
Hi. So I too was going to use inclusion. But I think because our departments had a massive change in the last couple of years, so we've put in a new framework, new forms, a new recording system and things. I think it's a really good time for us. I think the timing is great. The refresh standards appear to have like a closer bond between the volunteer and the organisations as well. So it's sort of more working together, not just telling the volunteers, this is it, this is the policies, this is procedures. So I think the new standards are more, well, inclusive, but yeah, so it has a better bond between us both as well. The standards also, we still in our department have a lot of work still, but we are on the tail end. So it's really refreshing to see, you know, what we can work towards as well. Just sort of just putting in like in standard 1 responsibilities for engaging. So including engaging really helps as well. I've got 15 groups that are active at the moment, community groups. That's out of 26 groups in the 4 caretaker programs. And a lot of the groups have, you know, while the old standard says, you know, leading and managing volunteers, some of the groups are group leaders or myself, but engaging is where we're sort of lacking as well, especially with younger people. So trying to get all our groups more engaging will help. Yeah, I think it's just a really good time for us that these new standards have come out.
That's wonderful feedback. Thank you, Jenna. And, you know, we know with the declining volunteer numbers, we need to look at ways that we can better engage and support our volunteers and ensure that their participation comes through, and that is a collaborative thing between organisations and the volunteer. Okay, so our second question again, Lois, we'll start with you. What are you most excited about in terms of these changes?
Well, I am quite excited. I'm excited about the fact that they reflect and focus on meaningful participation. And I think then it forms a process that I think, as Jenna was really saying, was doing with the volunteer rather than doing for. So I think that will be easier to work against, that the standards now, because a lot of it is just that we've been doing it and that's how it's done. So, and also I'm excited about unpacking them next year in our network meetings, to be honest. Be really great.
Wonderful. What about you, Kate? What are you most excited about?
Well, I think the timing is great, because I know it's been a few months now since the national strategy came out, and kind of, you know, given us a bit of time to get our heads around that, and that's such a great document. So I'm actually, I don't know if excited is the right word. I think it'll be a really good experience it's a really good opportunity to look at the strategy and the new standards together, and to build a response to them at the same time. You know, like I've started the work on the MRC TAS response being at the moment it's just like thinking points, but you know, response to the national strategy, and so it will kind of work really well together, I think. So I'm excited, a bit like Lois, to unpack to unpack everything and look at what's the current practice and how can I best reflect current practice against national standards.
Great, thank you, Kate. Yeah, I think definitely that current practice and the contemporary language and environment that comes in is really important to recognise. What about you, Jenna? What excites you about the refresh standards?
Well, yeah, definitely the timing excites me, just because now we're on the tail end of, you know, putting all our systems in place. We've been doing a lot of work with the standards, but which standard is it? So standard under 3, volunteer roles are meaningful and tailored. So including feedback engagement with volunteers about their experience. So that sort of section excites me, because that's sort of something that we have been lacking in, is, you know, getting feedback from the volunteers. Sort of, it's more, you know, pushing out the roles. So yeah, having this list, I guess, is what excites me. But yeah, having more engagement with the volunteers.
Yeah, I think it definitely provides that prompt for organisations and groups to think about how they can better engage their volunteers and how they can really draw on their interests and strengths and make sure that, you know, they're often the ones doing the roles. So having them provide feedback around what's working, what's not working, and how that might be able to be adjusted and within your team.
Yeah, because there's so much that goes into volunteering. You know, some things may get missed. So having this, you know, it really refreshes it in my own brain, you know, what we should be doing and how we can better engage with the volunteers.
Great. All right. Next question, Lois. How do you plan to implement the refresh standards in your organisation? Or how does this help you to support your volunteers? So you can address both questions or one of those questions, because I understand there's different approaches there.
Okay. So we're heading, excuse me, we're heading up to our 50th training group next year, early next year, of volunteers. So that'll be great to go through that. And I think through the new standards, refresh standards, and I think often I just give out, I don't give them the full document. I mean, they can look it up, but I just give them the basic standards. So I think that's going to be really great, being able to update the paperwork for new volunteers. And I'll be putting it through the monthly newsletter, do one standard a month. So it'll take, you know, most of next year. And I think also it'll be interesting for the board to have a look at the new standards too, or the refresh standards, sorry. Yeah. So that's probably just me answering the first one. I think the second question about helping us to support our volunteers, I've just been jotting some things down that we've been talking about around culture and how we could measure different things. I think we acknowledge our volunteers well, but we may not measure as well the things that volunteers are providing, and often it probably comes out in an AGM report and not in a regular format, which is something I think we should look at. Yeah.
Well, that's really great, Lois. It's great that it provides those opportunities for reflection and for you to be thinking about how you might do things differently or improve on your practices based on that. Kate, how do you plan to implement the refresh standards in your organisation at MRC TAS, or how does this help you to support your volunteers?
Well, I just wrote slowly. Again, you know, a lot of us, this is not our the only thing that we do. So it's never an instant fix, and that's a really disappointing thing, I know, but it's just reality. But the thing is, it gives us a basis to start with. Like, we're not 100% starting from scratch. We've got a document that can guide us in doing what we do. And just coming back to Lois's point, and I've written down here that probably my biggest wish about the implementation of something like this is around Standard 1. And Standard 1's really tricky because it's all about that leadership buy-in. And I think quite often, and I've said this before, so I don't want to sound like I'm just repeating myself, but quite often the leadership groups in organisations or the boards in organisations don't really understand or know what's going on down in the bowels of the organisation. And so I hope that the way that Standard 1 is now worded will allow for a little bit more buy-in from leadership around the involvement of volunteers. And Lois is right also too about like the outcomes of volunteering, and hopefully it will be a way that we can demonstrate better outside of like one definitive report once a year, which is often focused around numbers, but actually be able to cohesively demonstrate the outcomes and the inputs of the volunteer involvement across the organisations. But I'm going to come back to the strategy too, because I think it's something that really needs to, from my perspective, needs to be done with the national strategy. So if you can have an organisational response to the national strategy, which, as I said, is just thinking dot points at the moment, and then align those with the standards, and then you've potentially got something developed and really well focused for 10 years of volunteer involvement within the organisation. That's kind of like, I haven't really answered your question, but that's kind of like to implement it is not going to be quick, but hopefully we can get the buy-in from the leadership, and hopefully the volunteers, if we can go to them with something that sounds less formal and bureaucratic, as the 2015 ones did, you just have more ownership across the organisation of the standards and the strategy.
The coffee's going to rain 60%.
Wonderful, thank you, Kate. Yeah, I think the Standard 1 change is a really significant one, and volunteering is embedded in leadership, governance and culture from just leadership and management. So it's really about embedding and making sure that it's recognised and understood. And I really like what you said about the outcomes rather than just the numbers. So I think, for so long we've seen, how many volunteers we've got, how many hours they contribute, etc., etc. Whereas if we look at the actual impact that those volunteers have, and what that means, what the difference is in terms of if we didn't have those volunteers, this is the impact that they add to our organisations, to our communities, etc. So that's really, really valuable to recognise. Heather, how do you plan to implement the refresh standards in your organisation, or how does this help you to support your volunteers?
Yep. So we're doing. We need to do a bit of work on a couple of the standards, but I think overall the standards will help with our work health safety practices as well. So it'll be more inclusive with the volunteers actually. Sitting down and assisting with the job risk analysis forms that we do. So we're not just giving them a form saying this is what you need to do, but they can actually sit in with us and work and give their feedback on the safety as well. The other thing, so we're doing a lot of the volunteers are recognised. So the last 12 months, we're trying to put out more recognition of our volunteers. So I think that's the whole standard, the whole section will help us as well. We try to acknowledge volunteers, and when we recognise the volunteers, it will also show, how many volunteers we actually have in our department, and then therefore the part where it says, you know, do we have enough resources and time? So people with responsibility for volunteers have sufficient time and resources, and that's not always the case. So having these standards might show that we need to put more effort into, you know, staff across Tasmania, putting more time into volunteers as well. And that goes back to the recognition as well. Some areas might need support, so this document will help, I think.
Yeah, hopefully that's useful for people to use in their organisations and with their volunteer groups to help strengthen the support that is available to support volunteers and volunteer programs. It is based around best practice, so it'd be great to acknowledge that. That's really great. Thank you. Lois, anything else from you that you would like to share in terms of thoughts around the refresh standards?
I only wrote down one thing. It was probably loads and loads, but I think because the refresh standards are more focused on the volunteer and their role, it gives volunteers more empowerment, and I think it provides more respect for the role of volunteers. So yeah, it's probably been covered, but it was just something that stuck out to me. Yeah.
Great. Kate, how about you?
Sorry, what was the question? I was listening to the dogs barking.
The beauty of working from home. Anything else that you would like to add in terms of the refresh standards and what that means for you and your organisation, volunteers?
Yeah, look, I'm really excited. I know I usually get excited when something new comes out and then I run out of time, which is unfortunate. But I'm actually really excited. I was excited to start work on like our response to the strategy. And I think I'm looking, like Lois said earlier, I'm looking forward to like unpacking the new standards next year and getting some guidance around how I can best implement it. And I'm actually really hoping that this year's been a bit of a blur because I've been doing wearing a couple of different hats, and hoping that next year I'll be able to be a bit more immersed in the volunteer program and actually involve volunteers a bit more in our response to the standards, whereas in 2015 it was a bit more organisation led without much volunteer involvement. So that will be good.
Yeah, great reflection. Thank you. And I love how you've been able to connect sorry, I'm reading comments here. The national strategy for volunteering with the refresh standards and with your approach as well. It is part of our budget priority submission to ask for commitment from the Tasmanian government to develop a Tasmanian volunteer strategy. So, you know, bringing it into a Tasmanian context would be even more exciting. And yeah, fingers crossed that that comes through and we can look at those things collectively. All right. Rhonda, wondering please if you would mind touching on any comments or questions that you've seen come through in the chat. So we do have time to address a few of those and go to the audience for some comments and questions as well.
Yeah, sure. One of the things we might just quickly do as well is have a look at standard 8. It may be that we might have just missed that one before, Mel, if you don't mind just comparing the previous standard 8 to the upcoming standard 8 as a refresher for the group. Thanks.
Oh, did I miss that one?
I think we're excited about the panel, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I was going to
standard, so it worked really well. So.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to add, have continuous improvement as well for just Parks and Wildlife as well. But yeah, I didn't realise you'd missed it.
Sorry. Yeah, so standard 8 has come from quality management and continuous improvement to policies and practices are continually improved. So like Kate, I think it was pointed out, the language is just a bit more accessible there and not as daunting, hopefully. And we've got the descriptor added in there. So effective volunteer involvement results from a system of best practice, regular review and continuous improvement. And just a couple of small highlighted changes there that you can see. Sorry for missing that one. I was excited to get to our panel. And sorry, Jenna, I skipped over you for a final comment about anything else that you would like to talk to.
No, that's okay. I was just going to add the it sort of shows that we always need to be continuously improving as well. I know with myself, with parks, if our forms get stale or they're not relevant, continuously update as well as the world changes.
Great, thank you. And back to you. Thank you, Rhonda, for reminding me of that. And let's see what comments and questions we've got through the chat.
Yeah, sure. Glenda's raised a question there around some opportunities to understand best practice volunteer management in line with volunteer complaints and procedures. And there's also just been a comment that's been shared in the chat there regarding some of the resources that are available through the New South Wales knowledge base and some volunteer management templates that might be of interest to people within this group as well. Glenda's also got another question here around how, if we've got some examples within the group around how we can best recognise our volunteers. And that may be something that people within the session today would like to share around how they recognise volunteers.
Great. I wonder if our panel members have something to add around volunteer recognition and sharing how that looks for your organisation.
I think it's always ever changing and we need to be creative about how we acknowledge and recognise volunteers. And I get a lot of feedback. I used to do a lot of certificates, and someone said, "Oh, I don't do them because I don't know where to put them. I don't know what I want to do, what to do with them." So I don't do that now, but we certainly do a lot of different things, and a lot of acknowledgement in the newsletter, and always at our events try and make that as individually special as we can. Send out a lot of photos of different events. I think the list just goes on, and I think the Volunteering Tas has some great resources and some guide sheets, certainly with just loads of ideas of how to acknowledge and recognise. And I think it, so it's personalised and it's individual as much as you can, really.
Yeah, and it is tricky because everyone has different expectations or preferences there. So trying to find something that fits everyone's need is not always easy, and where possible, looking at how you can individually recognise volunteers, but recognising also that isn't always achievable. What about you, Kate? What's volunteer recognition look like for MRC Tas?
Not as good as it should, but we do this, the end, like always do the end. Our big thing is the end of year volunteer recognition event, which I'm a bit behind schedule on this year, but is now organised. And Lois is again right. People don't you get the feedback about things like certificates, and they don't want something handed to them as a token. It's more about that ongoing recognition. I make a really big effort to make sure I catch up with the volunteers when they're in the office, and always thank them for what they do. I encourage the other teams to make sure they're acknowledging the ongoing acknowledgement of volunteer involvement. I will certainly do certificates or letters of acknowledgement if people request it, which you'll quite often get when people are going for PPR or whatever, permanent residency, so that they can, they've got that evidence of volunteer involvement. So I think it's sometimes listening to the volunteers, and I know that it's probably something I'm not that great at, so I'm not the best example, but I do my best to to acknowledge the volunteers on an ongoing basis.
And Anna, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I would like to say that I came to a wonderful event that Parks and Wildlife hosted for National Volunteer Week in Devonport this year, and talking to lots of your volunteers as part of that morning tea that you put on. They're just like, oh, isn't this lovely? Like, they've put on a morning tea for us, and you know, really appreciate us. Like, it wasn't something huge to organise, I assume. I shouldn't assume. But you know, just that gesture was really, it was obvious how much they appreciated that. So well done. But is there, do you want to talk to that or other things that you do to recognise volunteers?
Yeah, so we've only been working in this space in the last year. So previous to that, it was sort of individual, a thank you, or, you know, nothing widespread recognised. So we're going to continue with having a morning tea in National Volunteers Week, and we're even under the Department of Natural Resources and Environment sort of breaking it up even more. So botanical gardens will have their own morning tea, parks in the south will have their own morning tea, fish care, etc. And so apparently we now have a budget for some gifts. So we're having hats, high-vis vests, pins, and I think a drink bottle as well. I'm not sure. So we're sort of giving out a thank you present next year to volunteers as well. We do have a certificate that's signed off by the secretary of the department, but we're sort of reserving that to, say, 15 years, 10 years volunteering, and then we'll give out a certificate because it's similar to everyone else here. You know, the volunteers don't so much want that because they don't know where to put it or what to do with it, but sometimes it is deserving of a certificate. The other thing I like to do is, so now that Cradle Mountain has implemented a $15 bus ticket fee, so volunteers at Cradle and on the overland track, you know, using my discretion to give them a free bus ticket as well when they do go to Cradle, because they do a lot of work at Cradle Mountain, and so that's another way that I'm sort of recognising them just in my area as well. So allowing them to, you know, just jump on a bus because they've done a lot of work there. But yeah, so next year is going to be bigger and better. You'll have to come again.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great. I loved it. There's some great comments in the chat there. So Lois has popped in around formal and informal and individual recognition, celebrating events and achievements in other parts of volunteers' lives, if appropriate, and knowing your volunteers. So, you know, that's the ultimate goal, I think. Kate said that budget for recognition can be an issue, especially when funding's limited. Absolutely. And creativity is key. And Tevis, who is a volunteer with Volunteering Tasmania. Hi, Tevis. I can't see you on my screen, but if you've got your camera on, give everyone a wave. Tevis has said, yes, just a smile is the best recognition. Agree that different people have different expectations. Choose the best way to recognise by our observation. Like you buy a birthday / anniversary gift to your lovers. Doing it from the bottom of your heart. Yeah, that's lovely. I think having that connection is really, really important, and making sure that it's genuine and that, you know, as much as possible that it is individual. So they're all really great comments. Anything else, Rhonda, that you wanted to pick up on from the chat?
Yeah, I'd really love just to point out the comment that was made by Liv from Working It Out. She's highlighted here that she's impressed by the standard about recruiting for diversity, but it means organisations need to be aware of how to create culturally safe environments for those diverse groups. So they've also thrown open an opportunity there for organisations to working it out in the development of an inclusion strategy. I think it highlights a really important point there around bridging that gap between the standards, embedding the standards, and how we actually outwork that through our organisational and operational documentation and embedding some of those plans for our teams.
Wonderful. Thanks, Liv. Yeah, that's a great comment. And we do, through some of our programs and through the volunteer management activity, have a focus on priority groups that have been identified by the federal government, Department of Social Services, but unfortunately don't cover the priority group that you are you're referencing there. So we have been developing resources to support the sector around newly arrived migrants, people with disability and First Nations people in particular, but now doing some work in the unemployed and youth spaces as well. So certainly looking at how we can support the sector to be more inclusive of those groups, and through our inclusive volunteering program, supporting people with disability and mental health conditions into volunteering as a pathway to employment. So keen to continue to do some good work in there with the sector to increase that diversity and inclusion aspect. Wondering, while we have a couple of minutes before we wrap up, if there is anyone from the VT team that would like to add anything or make any comments, recognising that for many of the team, this is one of the first intros to the new, or to the refresh standards, not the new standard, refresh standards. So you may have some comments.
I'll throw out a comment. Hi everyone, my name's Ruth Osborne. I work on the VMA program that Mel was just talking about, that focuses on trying to support a more inclusive and accessible volunteering sector for those specified priority groups. And as part of that program, we've been running a community of practice that meets every couple of months. And there is an open invitation to anyone that would like to join that community of practice, so that we can do some more deep diving and share situations and talk through people's experiences and challenges and solutions, what's working well for them in that space. So get in touch with us if you want to be involved in that when it starts up again next year. And we've also, as Mel said, developed some resources and things that are available through our website.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ruth. Good opportunity for a plug for the community of practice and that work. Tim's put a nice comment in the chat as well. So Tim, from our team, some of the learnings from the work in one area looking at inclusion is transferable to other groups. So I'm trying to work out, I don't think it's meant to be hair, something about hearing. It's all about engaging respectfully and listening. Absolutely. So thank you. Thank you very much, Tim.
And just another quick comment from me, sorry, Mel, but to address Liv's comments as well, with regards to our priority groups that are directed by the Department of Social Services. But the approach that I'm taking for this project is to support a more inclusive and accessible volunteering sector. So as Tim's just commented in the comments there, there's, it transfers across. We don't need to put labels on particular groups in order to be inclusive of them. So definitely happy to continue those conversations.
Right, thank you. Now I am just sharing a survey link in the chat. We would really love your feedback from today's session. So there is a brief feedback survey there. We will also send that via email to attendees from today's session. Our sector development offerings for 2024 will include training around the refreshed national standards, as I mentioned before. So this is really just that taster and an opportunity for the sector to start to hear about those changes ahead of the launch, but we will share further opportunities with you to engage and to learn more. If you haven't already, please sign up to our e-news through our website and follow us on socials. It's always the best way to keep up to date with our upcoming training and events. The recording from today's session will be shared with those that have registered for this session, and it will also be available through our website. So you'll be able to go back and watch it if you would like to, and also share it with any colleagues if that is useful. And again, very much thank you for your interest in today's session and your attendance, and a big thank you to our wonderful panel of Lois, Kate and Jenna. Really appreciate you being involved and sharing so generously your insights and your knowledge in the volunteer management space. So
Pleasure.
thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And certainly hope that you'll be able to join us for our next 2 sessions today. We have our second session coming up at 11 a.m. around volunteer management platforms, and then another session at 1 p.m. around the Child and Youth Safe Organisations Framework, which is a big topic for the sector at the moment. So thanks again. Have a wonderful day and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.